emotions get so powerful that in stage 2, where, it's crystallized, I begin to be terrified that if you're not going to be there for me, then I can't survive. And therefore, if I see you talking to another guy, I become furious. If you tell me that just to cover things, you went out on a date, I get furious. I get scared. As a matter of fact, I might even stalk you to see where you went. Because at this point in crystallization, you can become so focused on that other person, you actually think you can't survive if he or she were not to wind up with you. Number 7, the limerent feels a deep longing for emotional union with the LO. That's what they want. This is all about, I want to feel connected. I want to feel that you love me no matter what. I want to know that you affirm me. I want to know that we're so deeply in love that nothing can ever tear us apart. Number 8, the limerent feels a powerful sense of empathy toward the LO and is willing to sacrifice for him or her. Like, okay, if it costs me my job, but it helps you get what you need, I love you so much I'll do that. If I have to give up my entire career and lose everything I've ever had to get you what you need or what you think you need, I'll do that because I'm focused on you and you're more important than anything, including me. Number 9, the limerent tends to reorder his or her daily priorities. In other words, that person may change the way that they dress, they may change their mannerisms, they may change their habits, and all of that is to become more attractive to the LO. And typically, they will also change their beliefs and values to be more available to the LO. You see, in stage 2, it can actually happen toward the end of stage 1, which is infatuation, but in stage 2, at least by stage 2, a person goes through this thing where that what I'm doing is in contradiction to my belief and value system. And so they do compartmentalized thinking. They keep it as far apart as they possibly can. I don't let myself think about these two things, but they can't keep it apart forever. And so finally, when they come into conflict inside of me, my beliefs and values are I should be faithful to my wife and be with my children. My beliefs and values are that I should not commit adultery. That's a violation of the 10 Commandments. But I so much want to be with Sally Sue. The intense emotion I feel for her is so powerful. Now, this is ripping me apart inside. That's why it's called cognitive dissonance. Dissonance means disharmony. It's killing me. And there's only 2 ways to resolve cognitive dissonance. And by the way, people will resolve cognitive dissonance because they can't live in that kind of misery forever. Well, I say 2 ways. I'll mention a 3rd way that I don't typically talk about, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you since we're making this as honest as we can. The first way, as you would imagine, is they stop what they're doing and start living consistently with their beliefs and values. Good. That's a good thing. The second is they modify their beliefs and values to allow them to do the thing that they're doing. In other words, I used to believe that God would say don't commit adultery, but now I'm understanding that God really meant something different by that. Or interestingly, you can decide, oh, the Bible is just a bunch of words. It's no better than anything else out there. Or my counselor says that I should do what makes me happy. That's what God wants me to do. Or, I've come to realize there is no God. They're changing their beliefs and values. And if they have not been a religious person heretofore, it's whatever beliefs and values that they had. They change them to make what they're doing okay. Like, I can do this now. It's going to be all right. I can be this different person. And by the way, they do become a different person. Now, the 3rd way that I don't think I've ever mentioned out loud before because I just don't want to set a stage for bad things, but since I'm trying my best to explain it in great detail here, I think I need to go ahead and explain it to you, and that's this. The 3rd way is I can't choose between going back to my original beliefs and values or changing my beliefs and values to make this okay, and I'm so torn up, I am so miserable, I actually think the best course for me is not to exist. And people in those situations do away with themselves, or at least they try. And when you see that in a situation like this, from my viewpoint, when I hear of or see that, it's always the first thought of my brain, They could not deal with the cognitive dissonance. They couldn't make a choice. If they could have changed their beliefs and values altogether, they wouldn't be in this state. They couldn't do that. At the same time, they felt they could not give up the LO. And so because they couldn't deal one way or the other, they decided to end it for themselves. I hope and pray that that never happens again with anybody, anywhere. But in honesty, I need to tell you that's a possibility that could exist. Okay. Number 10, the limerence feels sexual desire for the LO. This desire is coupled with possessiveness, a strong drive for sexual exclusivity, like it's got to be me and nobody else. Feelings of jealousy or fear or competition from others. And so this strong sexual desire is based on the emotional connection they already have. Limerence is not really about sex, it's about the emotional connection, but then almost always this sex desire gets intense and powerful. Number 11, and yet the limerence craves emotional union much more strongly than the desire for sexual union with the LO. Number 12, the limerence feels that he or she cannot control the emotions that they feel for the LO. And so people in limerence will commonly report that their passion is involuntary and that it's uncontrollable. And number 13, to end up Fisher's list here, limerence is impermanent. It eventually subsides. Now, this is not just me saying this. This is the person who does all this scientific study on limerence, like with the fMRIs and things. It may take longer to subside if physical or social barriers inhibit the limerence partners from seeing each other regularly. So if they're further apart, one's on one side of the country and the other one's someplace else, it can take longer. But it will end. Used to, I would see writings from Fisher who would say that limerence will last somewhere between 3 months and 36 months. The later writing I saw indicated that, well, okay, let's modify that some. It can be somewhere between 3 months and 48 months. And I know that if your spouse is in limerence, you did not want to hear that. But understand that tends to be the extreme on either side. Very few end as quickly as 3 months, and relatively few last as long as 48 months. Sometimes people say, can it last longer than that? And the answer is, yeah, it can, but those are statistical outliers. I mean, those are extremely rare. The thing is, limerence has to end. As Fisher would understand and explain, it's a biological necessity because of the obsessive thinking, the focus on the other person, the lack of productivity, etc., etc. People couldn't live. I'm talking about society would finally just fold in on itself because we need to be having the ability to work and produce, to plant the seeds, to harvest the crops, to do all the things that we need to do. And if we went into that level of limerence and stayed in it for the rest of our lives, first of all, before birth control, we would have killed all the women because they would have had baby finally dead because we'd have been putting those babies right behind each other. Not because we're trying to make babies, but because of the great strong connection between the two people. So it always ends. Always. I run into people regularly who say it will not. Yeah, well, it will. And in crystallization, there's another thing or two that can happen. So, for example, because of my cognitive dissonance, one thing that I may do, and typically, again, this is not done from a logical standpoint, like let me figure out what I can do. It's done inside of me to help me without me really processing that I'm doing it. And this thing is that I'll start rewriting history, which means that the good things that happened with my spouse beforehand are not remembered, or if they are remembered, not remembered as good things. The bad things that happened with my spouse, I remember, but they have become magnified and exacerbated. So it's not uncommon for a person in limerence to say something like, I never was in love with my spouse. Never. When in actuality, if you go back and find the love letters and all those things from back when they first got together, you can actually prove that they were in love. But I'll tell you this right now, they won't believe it. They won't even believe their own handwriting if they wrote a real letter. It's going to be like, well, no, that was just the fantasizing of a kid. I was not old enough to understand what I was doing back then. And so they tend to rewrite history. And then they tend, and I understand that not every limerence does all of these things, okay? But they'll also tend to vilify the spouse. In other words, they take whatever flaws they have, and everybody is flawed, and exacerbate it to the nth degree. Like, man, she did this. You all think she's this nice, sweet woman, but you don't know what a bitch she is, because I can tell you she did this and this and this and this. Or my husband, oh, you think I should stay with him because you guys all think he's a good guy and a good friend? Let me tell you what he's really like. Now, typically they'll take things that actually happened, but they blow them out of proportion. So that it doesn't become the fact that he glared at me with a mean look, it becomes the fact that he was choking me. He said, really? It can change in their minds that much in history? Mm-hmm. And they'll vilify their spouse that intently? Mm-hmm. By the way, if somebody starts doing that about their spouse, don't argue with them. You'll just lock them down if you do. If they say things like that, you just go, wow, that's terrible. And then you don't pay any attention to it anymore. In my business, sometimes when we're trying to help people put marriages back together, if some guy were to say something like, well, my wife's got a demon. Really? Mm-hmm. The other night, our head went all the way around. I'm not going to argue with him. I'm going to say, wow, that must have been scary. But that's okay. We can fix that later. And then I keep going right on toward the other things, because arguing is going to lock them down. And so they go through this phase 2. Now, again, it's an up and down kind of thing. It's not absolutely flat. Some days it's stronger, some days it's weaker. But at some point, there's going to be a phase 3. And that's deterioration. That's when this thing begins to fall apart, and it will. What I mean by that is that they begin to lose the halo effect. Like, why did I not notice that about her before? Or, maybe he's not the Prince Charming that I thought he was. Or, what you're doing really ticks me off. And so in the deterioration phase, that halo effect begins to get tarnished, and you actually begin to notice the flaws in the other person that you didn't let yourself see before. The vilifying the spouse might continue for a while, but it's not as adamant. In other words, it's like, I'm not so intent now on trying to convince you my spouse is this evil, terrible person. And as they're coming out in this phase 3, as things are deteriorating, that's when people sometimes begin to count the cost. By the way, this is a wavy line too. It's not directly straight down, because sometimes it actually goes back up a little bit. And then it loops back down a little bit, and back up a little bit, and then back down a little bit. You see, understand that none of this is a straight, clear, linear process. Now, sometimes people say to me, well, can you tell me exactly which phase my spouse is in? No, I can't do that. We are, at this point, developing more specific guidelines that I'm sharing with you here that we'll actually make available. I think we're probably going to do a book on it so we can explain it in great detail, to say these are the characteristics that we see in phase 1, these are the characteristics we see in phase 2, in more detail than I'm explaining now, you understand. And these are the characteristics we see in phase 3. And so by looking at these, you can kind of get an idea as to which one a person is in, but understand, because it's a squiggly line everywhere, as they go into the infatuation up to the crystallization, and then a wavy line across there. And when they finally go into deterioration, another wavy line there. It goes up and it goes back down and it goes back up. Don't be shocked when a person seems to be coming way out of it. Like, I can't believe I've left my family. I miss you guys so much. I'm leaving her. I'm getting an apartment down the street from you guys. Can't quite move in yet, but I want to be close to you. And then 2 weeks later, right back over there with the other person. Don't panic when that happens. That can still be phase 3. Now, when people come down and those things begin to change, it does not necessarily mean that they're coming back to their spouse if the limerence has led them out of a marriage. Now, many, many years ago, I divorced my wife, Alice, so I could be with my LO. This was back in the 1980s. So it was many years ago. My intention was to be with her, but like as is the case with nearly everyone who does that, I mean the vast, vast majority, she and I did not wind up together. You see, the person who went into limerence the fastest, and in our situation that was her, tends to be the person that comes out of limerence first and faster. And just as she knew all the things to pull me back into the relationship when I would try to pull out of it over in the infatuation phase 1 stage, I did everything I knew how to do to pull her back into it when she was in the stage 3 deterioration phase.